Good afternoon and good evening to everyone who has joined us for today's very special AFT Book Club. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker, and I'm Executive Director of the Albert Shanker Institute. And we are so privileged to be able to co-host the AFT Book Club with AFT and Share My Lesson. Tonight, we are really excited to bring you a really unique book club. As you know, if you have tuned in often to all of our accomplished and award-winning authors, Randi Weingarten is usually our host of our book club, and she and our guests have fantastic discussions about their work. Well, tonight, Randi Weingarten is the guest to the AFT Book Club, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jon Shelton, who is the president of AFT Wisconsin and a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, who will be our moderator tonight. Jon is a professor and chair of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, where he studies unions, labor, and education. He is an accomplished author and scholar, having written Teacher Strike, Public Education and the Making of a New American Political Order, and another book called The Education Myth, How Human Capital Trumped Social Democracy. It is my pleasure to invite Jon Shelton to be our moderator tonight, and he will introduce our guest author. Thanks, Jon.
Thank you so much, Mary Catherine, and thanks everybody for being here. I really can't tell you how thrilled I am to be doing this and you know, to kind of turn the table, so to speak, on this book club. And you know, would just like to start by introducing our author. Here's the book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers. It's a really terrific book. And of course, our guest is Randi Weingarten, who is my union president, your union president. Since 2008, Randi has served as the elected president of AFT, a union of 1.8 million educators, healthcare professionals, and public service workers. For the 10 years prior to that, she headed the United Federation of Teachers, which is the union representing educators in New York's public schools. And before that, taught social studies at Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn, New York. She has degrees from the Cardozo School of Law and the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And more importantly than all that stuff is just the leadership that Randi has shown during these very difficult times right now at the national level. And you know, I hear this from our members in Wisconsin every day, and just couldn't be more proud of my union president. So first off, Randi, welcome. And I want to congratulate you on seriously what is a really terrific book. And we were saying just before this that it's a bestseller now. So really congratulations and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jon. And I'm so appreciative, you know, given what, I mean, separate and apart from, you know, your union work, given your scholarly work, I am really appreciative of, and I was very fretful of what you would think about the book, because I am not the scholar that you are. And I'm really appreciative that you are doing the moderation with me today. Thank you. And for those of you who have never read Jon's books, they are fantastic. He really understands labor and education and what is going on in terms of the attempt, the intentional attempt to undermine worker power. So thank you, Jon.
Amazing. Well, so if you all have questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to have time to get to y'all's questions. I know Randi wants to answer those, but I'm going to start off with really, I think, just getting into this book. Of course, Randi, you are a super busy person. You come to Wisconsin, I think, just over the past few years. You know, you came here to Stevens Point when the administration was trying to gut the liberal arts there at the university. I know you've been to Milwaukee a number of times. A couple of years ago, you were in Green Bay, and we had a very good, you know, conversation with lots of folks in this area. And then just in August, you were in Eau Claire for what was really a dynamic event here in our state, of course, in a really important congressional district. So you're in Wisconsin all the time. I imagine you're going lots of other places. In fact, I know you're going lots of other places too. And I know you've got a lot of demands on your time. So I guess I want to just start by asking, why did you decide to write this book now? Like, why did you think it was important right now to write a book at this moment?
So, you know, I never actually thought a book was in me, although a whole lot of people keep saying to me, write a book, because those of you who write books, there's something different about when you make an argument in a book and when you try to exercise the discipline that is necessary in a book. I think I'm trying to remember how many notes, 300, 271, I'm sorry, there's about 200 notes. There's about 20 different pages of notes in this book on the various different pages. And I knew that it was important to actually have it well referenced, and it was important for me to be able to ensure that everything I was saying that was not my personal opinion, that I had the facts there, and I had scholars that were there. So it actually took quite a bit of time, but I wrote it, and I wrote it a lot and I had help writing it, but I wrote it a lot during the 2024 campaign, during the summer, during the whole issue around whether Joe Biden would run or not, and then during the 107 days that Kamala Harris was running for president. And I wrote it because I was really concerned about two things. Number one was all of the smearing of teachers and our union seemed to take on a different tenor with the culture wars that were going on. There seemed to be it was not simply about, whether people liked or disliked public education. It did look like a death trap. And it looked like there was an attempt to take what should be not political. I'm not saying that the work of having public education is not political. Obviously, when we want to fight for funding and fight for the kinds of things that public schools have to do, all of that stuff is political. But that it became a political culture war in a way that the right in particular, the far right in particular, looked like they were really trying to kill it. And that there was an intentionality there that had nothing to do with school kids. And the sliming and smearing of teachers, not just of Becky and myself, the president of the NEA, and myself, but the smearing was intense and was personal and was intended as a death threat. And so I wanted to figure out why that was going on. And then on top of that, what I saw during the election was, and look, I think I take personal responsibility for this. We have not pushed hard enough in K-12 to have conversations about comparative governments, about things like fascism or authoritarianism or oligarchy or socialism or communism. So what ends up happening is we have a conversation about democracy. Yes, do we have one? No, do we not have one? How to make it better? And so people don't know what it means. So it became a warning sign about what is fascistic behavior and how do you recognize it instead of just weaponize it or politicize it. And the third reason I wrote this was I am sick and tired of teachers getting bashed for everything that they do. And we get very little resources, and this is K-12 and higher education. And the first instinct of politicians is to bash us or to be silent, as opposed to helping us do what is probably some of the most important work in America, which is how do you create an educated citizenry that can discern fact from fiction and have the skills and knowledge that young people need to achieve the American dream. So if that's the promise of America, why are people not helping us? Why are they constantly hurting us? So those were the three reasons I felt I should do it. And I felt like if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? Like this seemed like a moment. So I really pushed myself to try to do that.
Well, I know I speak for a lot of people when I say I'm appreciative that you got this out here. And I think it needs to be out here right at this moment. So I think the timing couldn't be better. I want to dig in a little bit to a couple of things that you mentioned there. The first is, I think one of the really interesting things that you do in this book is you make a really clear distinction between talking about what you just said, sort of fascist behaviors and fascist. And there's a lot of name calling, a lot of people referring to others as fascists right now, and maybe rightly so, maybe, I think in many cases. But you make a conscious choice in this book not to call any single person a fascist. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, first of all, why you made the choice to approach things that way. And then if you could tell us a little bit more about what you see as fascist behavior,
Right.
and why that's so threatening.
I love that somebody's about to put a definition of fascism on the screen. So you're very right, John. I made a conscious decision from early on not to actually call anyone a fascist. And in the rereading and the editing process of the book, that was part of the lens that I used in terms of editing. The actual draft, and you as an author, you know this, all of this was new to me. The actual draft, the first draft, was actually due a week after the election. I asked for a little bit more time because I really wanted to actually think about what that meant. So I asked for a few more weeks. And then the second and third drafts were due by the end of April. And I had, just so you all know, I had Ruth Ben-Ghiat and Eric Ward as two of my readers, because I wanted to have a reader from a civil rights perspective and a reader from a historical perspective, and someone who really understood all of these fascistic behaviors. And Ruth clearly does, and Eric clearly does. So the decision was, and who would have known how prescient that was for right now? I didn't want the conversation of the book to be reduced to, yes, he is, no, he isn't. Because that was not my point. If you believe in critical thinking, if you believe in kids being able to discern fact from fiction, if you believe in teaching kids how to think, not what to think, if you believe in all the things that is now just posted, then you want young people to be able to arrive at their own conclusions. And I thought that if I did it myself, then what would happen is that would be the whole conversation of the book, and I would be defeating the very point I was trying to make about critical thinking. And so those were the two reasons I did it. At the same time, I used the word fascist instead of authoritarianism or oligarchy or all these other words, because when you get to fascism, and I hope we never get to that kind of government in the United States, freedom is pretty much over. It's done. And so I really intended the word to be a warning.
That's really, really important. Obviously. So yeah, appreciate you walking us through that. One of the things you wrote in the intro is, and I'm going to quote here because I want to make sure I get it right. You say, teachers aren't being smeared and undermined because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're doing something very, very right. And I think, I see this with our members in Wisconsin every day, and whether it's UW system, tech colleges, K-12 schools. I think every single person who I've talked to at every level has felt that. They've felt smeared. They've felt like they've been, having to sort of like answer for their livelihood in a way that people in other professions don't really have to do that. I was just actually in a Facebook thread recently where somebody from the general public here was essentially saying that faculty at UW Green Bay shouldn't have offices because they're paying our salaries, right? But you frame this really well in the book, I think, and it really made me think about it differently. What is it that teachers are doing right? Why is it that teachers, what is it that they're doing right that is leading us to be smeared in the public sphere?
So and teachers sometimes we are in sometimes our own worst enemy in terms of this, because we don't, we believe in what we do, but we also believe in being a servant leader many times. And so when somebody criticizes us, then we seriously think about the criticism as opposed to saying, why are you doing that? And what are you doing? I mean, I often watch teachers who are desperately in need of a raise when a public official comes in and they never talk about the need for a raise. And I often, and a public official will say, well, you told me that they needed raises and none of them said anything about it. I said, because they don't think about themselves. They think about their kids. And so part of what happens with teachers is that that you rarely, or I rarely see anyone who goes into teaching, sorry, I'm about to do a double negative, that doesn't want to make a difference in the lives of kids. You cannot actually be a school teacher, pre-K through higher ed, unless you want to make a difference in the lives of young people. And the reason so that is what they do right. They come in with a value proposition that's not about capital, that's not about making money, that's not about the almighty dollar. They come in with a value proposition that basically says, I want to make a difference in the lives of kids. That's what I want to do in my professional pursuit. And in exchange for that, I need to just be treated respectfully. Like, give me the conditions that I need to do my job and give me a decent enough salary and support so that my family will be okay. Now, that is an important social contract. That's what they do right. That is the foundation for a democracy. It's a foundation for broad-based opportunity. And instead of actually somebody saying, okay, how do I make that happen? We get instead, you didn't do this, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do this. I mean, think about just last week. Yes, Charlie Kirk's murder was horrible. Political violence of all kinds is horrible. What happened today in the church is horrible. We need to deal with our gun problem in the United States. But when it gets to political violence, we also all have an obligation, I think, to de-escalate. What happened in the next few days? Every child in America, because of the way in which the algorithms are used or done without any guardrails by the tech companies and by social media companies, everybody saw how horrible this assassination was. And they saw what happened to Kirk. It doesn't matter what you think of it, everybody saw that. Children saw that. And the next 2 or 3 days, teachers all across America had to figure out how to help make kids safe. And what happened in Texas and in Florida, instead of those superintendents putting something out to say to teachers, this is the guidance I would use, I would help you with, this is what we should be doing. What they did is a gotcha memo that said to others, snitch on your colleagues. If they said something that we don't like, snitch on them. And what happened? Most teachers did everything in their power to do what they needed to do to help kids deal with the next few days. That's what teachers do. Instead of smearing them, that was the instinct of these right-wing ideologues, to smear them and to have snitch lines. And what did teachers do? They did everything they could to essentially help kids try to deal with what they had just witnessed.
So that's fascinating, and I want to extend this a little, this point just a little bit, because one of the things you do in the title of the book, right? It's not why fascists hate teachers or why fascists use teachers, for political points. It's why fascists fear teachers. Why is it that what we do? Why does that? I really like the way that you create a sense of agency for us in this book, right? Why is it that what we do causes fascists, authoritarians, whatever you want to call it, to fear us? Why do they fear us?
So there's two huge things that we do, which I think is why they fear us. Number one, the creation, it's not the creation of knowledge, it's the pathway for kids and young people, and frankly, we teach older people too, but for the people we teach, our students, to have the agency of knowledge, to have critical thinking skills, to be able to not only discern fact from fiction, but to be able to actually see around a corner, to think about, to be able to problem solve, to have that agency so that no one can tell, so that they really have the skills of learning how to think and how to solve a problem, how to communicate, how to cooperate with others, how to deal with a conflictual situation. That knowledge is what is essential. Frankly, the framers said it. That knowledge is essential not only for, kids and their own opportunity, but it is essential for democracy. It is essential for a society. That's number one. And number two, and this I would actually have never thought I would see in America. But number two is that what teachers do in public schools all across the country, by having this kind of system of public schools all across the country, we create a public square, a public space, a space where people who don't know each other, who are really different from each other, come together in community. That's pluralism. That is the essential nature of democracy, because for we the people to be able to live in a society and act in a society, then we need to create a pluralistic society, not a fractionalized one, not one with gated communities, not one where there's no way of people who don't know each other to be inclusive and understanding of each other. So it is the pluralism, the safe and welcoming environments we try to do in classrooms and campuses, where people who are different understand and respect each other. They don't have to like each other, but instead of seeing each other as an enemy, we see each other for who we are respectfully. And the second, obviously, is knowledge. And both of those things, if you look at fascistic regimes throughout time, they create so much fear of the other. They want to have so much fear, and they want to have an obedience, an obeisance to the mythical past. So it's only the strong man who is the one that you lean on or look to, not your community, not your colleagues, not your friends. So it is what we do in terms of the creation of community and pluralism and the creation of knowledge. Those two things, they are the antidote to fascism, and those are the things that fascists fear.
Really appreciate that. I mean, I think right now I talk to so many people, I know you do too, and we'll get a little more into this later, I think, but who are asking, how do I survive what's happening? How do I survive the daily onslaught of all this news? And, I think thinking about things the way that your book frames is really important for people, because we need to understand the work that we're doing is existential. And I think your book really points that out very
Yes.
powerfully. Yeah. So one of the things that you do, right? I mean, so clearly we can tell
Thank you,
ourselves
John.
this. Yes. One of the things that you do in this book, and we can really tell ourselves, that our work is important. But I think it's a really interesting choice, and I think a great choice to use examples of teachers throughout history who have fought against various kinds of authoritarianism. So for folks who are thinking about getting a copy of this book, Randi documents teachers from Norway to New Hampshire to DC to West Virginia, Peoria, Illinois, even a young Lyndon Baines Johnson in Texas. And what I'd like to do now is have you, if you're up to it, do a reading from the introduction, specifically where you tell us that powerful story of teachers who collectively resisted the Nazis through a pretty seemingly small action, but I think it's a really powerful way.
Right.
And if you wouldn't mind reading that for us, and then reflect on why you chose to open the book with that.
Sure. And there is, I am wearing a paperclip. If any of you watched MSNBC last night, Molly Jong Fast was the guest host on the weekend show, and she was wearing a paperclip. If you watch E. Jean Carroll is wearing a paperclip. And no spoiler, I'm not going to do a spoiler alert, but you'll see in the next few days how we're going to join forces on this in terms of people wearing paperclips, and you'll see why in a minute. In 1940, Adolf Hitler had gained power and territory across a widening swath of Europe. The leaders of Norway's government fled, and a Nazi puppet was put in power. Among the first to protest the Nazi takeover of Norway were the country's teachers. And since pins and badges with the likeness of the exiled king were now illegal, teachers and students used a clever, subtle sign to show their resistance. Look, remember, this was the 1940s. They wore paperclips. When teachers wore them on their lapels, it signified that they remained united, bound together like a stack of papers against Nazi rule. The protest spread. Eventually, students took to wearing whole chains of paperclips like necklaces. Frustrated that teachers proved so influential in undermining fascism, the Nazi government eventually created a Nazi teacher network and mandated that all teachers in the country join it. But out of an estimated 14,000 teachers in Norway at the time, upwards of 12,000 refused to do so. So Nazis barged into schools and beat teachers and students, trying to physically force them into submission. That didn't work either. So then the Nazi government closed the schools. Hundreds of thousands of parents wrote letters to the government in protest. And what did the teachers do? They kept teaching. They found places to hold classes in private and kept promoting freedom of information and freedom of thought. Increasingly incensed, the fascist government sent at least 1,000 teachers to concentration camps and 500 others to forced labor camps. But still, the teachers kept teaching, and students kept learning how to think for themselves. That's the power of community and the power of education. And many of you have heard me say so much, for those who are members here, you've heard me talk about the book, King's book, Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here? The last book he wrote. You hear me talking about, for those who are at the Teach conference, community, how essential community is in the long list of C's that I use about how to fight this. You know, we have to go to the courts, we have to go to the Congress, obviously the court of public opinion, commerce, but we have to start with community. And then what we have to do is there has to be some showing. That showing says to others that they are not alone. That's why No King's Day, the No King's Day protest in June was so important. The one in October will be even more important. What we did on March 4th was really important. The new higher ed campaign is really important. Showing up, the protesting and safeguarding our immigrant kids is really important. But these big ones, showing that people are not alone, is really important. And that's why I'm not, asking anyone to, I'm not organizing a paperclip protest. What is happening is it is starting to organize itself. And that is one of the ways we show each other and show Donald Trump that this is not who America is. We are bound together like a paperclip, bound together in schools and bound together in community.
That's powerful. And I think just an incredibly powerful story to open the book with. I want to switch gears for just a second. I know you're really proud of, I mentioned this in the intro, you're proud of your own teaching experience at Clara Barton High School. And, we've talked about how this book very much takes a historical approach, you looking at authoritarianism and democracy over the course of U.S. history and obviously in other countries as well. I'm curious if you could tell us, what did you take from your experience as a classroom teacher that informed your argument in this book?
So two things. One, I tried very much not to make this book is not an autobiography. It's not a biography. I use some of my own experience, but I really, really, really wanted to lift up other teachers. And that's why, like for Johnson, lifting him up in his teaching days, not in his presidential days. And there are so many other teachers that I lift up. People whose names people don't know, but I wanted, and some people know. People know Karen Lewis, they may know Abby Clemens, but I wanted to lift them up as teachers. For my own teaching experience, I became incredibly optimistic and hopeful. That's what I took from my own teaching experience. I love, I was also the lawyer for the teachers union for the UFT while I was teaching. I have always done, or unfortunately always done, pretty much 18-hour days in the work that I do. But what I got from my kids, so I had the same frustrations that other people had. We often, when I taught in the 1990s, we had to scavenge for chalk. I often would stop at the printing place in my neighborhood. I lived in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I would stop, sometimes double park if I couldn't get another parking spot, run into the printing place, make my copies because we didn't have, a reliable copier at the school for teachers to use. Then as they were printing, run to get a cup of coffee, hopefully not spill it on myself, and get into the car and get to school, like 2 minutes before I had to be there. So I had some very similar experiences to so many other teachers who were teaching in the 90s. I taught for 7 years. I started teaching the year of the Crown Heights riots in Brooklyn. And so there was a lot of tension in the first few weeks in the year in which I taught, because I taught in Crown Heights. But what I got from my kids is so much more than what they got from me. I got a sense that that if you create opportunity, kids would reach for it and take it and fly with it. You had to create trust. You had to create opportunity. You had to find ways that kids heard you and you heard them. And I learned at that moment, and many of you have heard me say this, it's not what you say, it's what's heard and felt. And you have to meet kids, or anyone you're talking to. I think this is true for the union too, where they are. You have to feel the pain. You have to see people. This is about a human endeavor. And so I learned that from my kids. And I love, as some of you have seen, every now and then, one of my students, many of them are teaching, many of them are doing, they have kids, they have, I don't think any of them have grandkids yet, but but I've had a few of them come to AFT events and introduce me or meet with people. And it's just the moment that you hear a young person who you have taught talk about what you meant to them. It is the essential connection that we as teachers have in terms of helping young people see their futures, not give them a future, but see it. That's what I took from my teaching.
And it really comes out in the book. I have one more question that I want to make sure I get to, and then I know we've got some questions from the audience that I'm gonna tee up for you. But since you mentioned Karen Lewis, you opened chapter 4 with her story and how she was inspired to organize and lead a movement to transform not just public education, but really the entire fabric of the city. Karen actually has Karen Lewis has a autobiography that just came out. It's really powerful, since we're talking about books. And it almost, from her story, it almost seems, I mean, she came to union leadership relatively late in life, and it almost seems like kind of backed into it a little bit, because
Yes,
she just
she did.
cared so much about her schools and her community. I'm wondering, what do you think the story of Lewis can teach us about our current moment? And what do you think, and I just want to kind of transition that into, like, what do you think we should be doing as union leaders right now to fight back? I mean, you sort of opened that conversation a little bit, but I'd like to just flesh that out a little bit more.
So this is Karen, for the, and I loved reading the book that she did, and the stories that she told about myself and Mark Richards coming to Chicago and meeting with her leadership and talking to them. Karen used to always call me Mom, which we laughed about, and I used to love, and we used to always talk about and tease about. She was local 1 and UFT was local 2. So it was constant. And I'm saying this in a way to humanize both of us, because joy and humor have to be a part of our leadership. We have to create a way that people can feel comfortable and feel connected to us. And Karen did that for me in many, many different ways. And I am always I just loved her. And but what she did for everyone was that Karen could have been that singular leader. I mean, I don't like the way in which Trump leads, but he is a leader that people follow. Barack Obama was one leader, charismatic leader that people follow. Karen could have been that as well. But what Karen really tried to do in her leadership was create a community of leaders. Stacey Davis Gates and Brandon Johnson are 2 of the people who led with her, are 2 of the people who learned from her. So often when people would say, well, you did this, Karen would say, no, we did this. What she did was she helped create agency so that members felt that they were part of the solution. They were part of the fight. And, in Janus, for those of you who remember, the Janus decision, required all of us to ensure that, or to, because it enabled anyone to drop the union at any time. So there actually has to be a value of belonging. The union has to be one that members see as something that's valuable to their existence, not an insurance company, not an insurance card, not just there when you need it. And part of the way in which Karen helped change the CTU so people felt a stake in it. They felt an ownership interest. They didn't feel that they were just, in exchange for dues, contracting out for a contract. She made it into a we, not into an I. And I thought that was really, and you could see it in terms of the fights that every one of us, there are many, many more fights that we need to pursue than we can pursue. And we have to make judgment calls if we want to be effective. And she figured out ways that people were part of the decision making in a way that they could also still move, not in a way that it then got mired into nothing. And I thought that was the most profound way of her leadership.
Awesome. Really appreciate you sharing that. I want to read a question from the audience. Randi, we know exhaustion is a tool of oppression. How do you fight fatigue and continue to battle even when those you are fighting for are silent?
So that's a really important question, because fatigue, fear, and apathy are the tools of autocrats. So, number one, you have to build a community. First off, none of us are none of us are Superman, and none of us have, and have those kind. I mean, maybe some of you, most of the members we represent have huge superpowers, but I don't think that we can be up, 24/7, and we can fly and all of that. That's what I'm trying to say. But the wellness work that people talk about a lot, it's really important to take care of yourself and take care and have people around you so that you are nurtured in some way, form, or manner, and give yourself that. And whether it is, I answered this question in a different earlier in the day when somebody asked me, how do I do it? And I said, look, I love walking my dog. That is a really important piece for me because I love the joy that she has when she's walking in the woods, and to have that moment with her. And when Sharon and I can do it together, we love having an hour walk with in the woods. It refreshes me. It has a sense that I can actually be communing with people I love or dogs I love and in nature. So find something that creates some joy for you, and don't neglect it. It is really important. You cannot be a social justice warrior if you're too exhausted. You can't be a warrior for democracy if you're too exhausted, because then so I want to give people permission to find that for themselves. And the second piece is do things in community. Don't do things by yourself. It's really important because then you have other people who may share the same fears or the same hopes. That's why you'll hear me say community over and over again. And number three, and I've said this a lot to people, no one can do everything, but we all can do something. And those somethings add up. And, so whether it's this paperclip, or whether it is going to No King's Day, or whether it is working in, doing tutoring, or working in a shelter, we all do this when there's a strike. We all have different roles, or when there's a contract campaign or an election campaign. But finding something, because I have found in my experience, first off, in June, the people who went to No Kings, they loved it. The people who made handmade signs, people loved it. There was an agency to it. So those three things. Please take care of yourself. Do something that feeds you. Number two, don't do this work alone. And number three, you can't do everything. Just do something.
That's so important, given everything that is constantly happening, for people to stay grounded like that and to think about how their actions can build to something bigger.
Right.
Shane Allen had a question about where the proceeds for this book are going, and hoping you could let us know about that.
Of course. So we decided early on that half the proceeds from everything go to the AFT in the Disaster Relief Fund or the Education Fund, and all the proceeds from any bulk sales go to the AFT. I wanted to be really clear that this was a book for people. This was a joint venture with the union, and I wanted to be as transparent and clear as I can. And so that's what we decided to do.
Amazing. I'm going to exercise my moderator privilege here and read the question of one of my friends from Wisconsin I know who asked this question, Betty Kosick, who's a retired K-12 teacher here. And Betty asked a question about how do we get to, or why haven't we had a national K-12 teacher strike?
So Betty, I would say I would look to what happened in South Korea, because I have to be very careful in the way in which I answer this question for all the obvious reasons. In South Korea, what ended up happening is the then president called martial law, and teachers and so many others, people went to the capital, they closed the country down for as long as it took. Now, it didn't take a long time, but people were prepared for as long as it took to close the country down, because that was a break the glass moment, and people were prepared. Now, to get to that point, there's a lot of other things that have to happen. And so when you have 5 to 10 million people, like 5 million people came out in the last No Kings, several, many hundreds of thousands came out at Hands Off. When you have these 500,000 people came out for Labor Day, for presence on Labor Day, we have to create the muscle of people showing up together on the streets together and not being scared of that. And that's the muscle that we are trying to create right now. And we have to do it with more and more and more and more people. So that is a really important step in terms of what we're doing.
I know you have probably some closing thoughts, and I want to make sure you have time for that. But I want to ask you one last question from my perspective. Right. I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times. There's so much stuff coming after us. There's also a question in the chat about, is the Department of Education going to continue to exist? I'd like you to let us all know, the context in which we're dealing with every day. Are you optimistic about the future?
I am hopeful about the future. I'm not using the terms optimism or pessimism, because there are some days that I'm optimistic and there are some days that I'm pessimistic, but I am always hopeful. And this is why I'm hopeful about the future. Not that we don't have significant problems, and not that that it's not scary. I mean, the warning, as you said, John, earlier, the last 2 or 3 weeks make pretty clear why the warning is so important, and why an understanding of what this kind of non-democratic behavior is, the undermining of the rule of law, the creating a conspiracy not based in any facts that enable you to investigate your enemies, the disappearing of people, the snitching on people, all of these things, these are all warning signs in a real fundamental way. So I don't want to pretend that they're not there. But I am hopeful because of what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. Not just what happened in terms of, Disney losing so much money so that Disney decided that their commerce pursuits were more important than obeying Donald Trump and his FCC director. But the fact that people said, no, this is not who we are. And the fact that he had like the largest audience the day that he came back that he's ever had. That people actually on Target have boycotted Target because of Target's refusal to keep its promises. And Target's bottom line has gone down, not up. The fact that people are still teaching every single day. The fact that today, Donald Trump may have just said, well, maybe I won't go into Portland, because people stood up between the governor and all of its elected officials. And I was in Portland last Thursday night, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Portland is back. Did you go downtown? It's unbelievable. But so many pictures from Portland in 24 hours about how peaceful and calm it is, that people didn't take the bait. The fact that our two institutions that you and I are both involved in, the labor movement and education, are two of the 3 institutions that help create power for working people, and that we are still growing, and that we are still teaching, and that we are still fighting. All of this gives me hope. And we're going to have to get people out to vote, just like you did in terms of Susan Crawford's election. Now, you know, who knew when Musk was trying to buy it and the millions of dollars he threw into it and the disinformation and the misinformation? But look how much she won by. And look how much Joe won by. And look what happened in Wisconsin. We have to get people off the couch. This is the thing I worry about more than anything else. Fear and apathy. We have to get people off the couch to see that we are not just fighting the demons of today. We are fighting for the future that we deserve and that our kids deserve and our families deserve tomorrow. And that means getting off the couch, going to No King's Day, going voting, figuring out how we show up as the people of America, saying, regardless, we believe in our freedom, we believe in basic humanity, we believe in basic dignity, and you, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, you are not J.D. Vance, you are not taking it away from us. That's what gives me hope.
Well, you know, I'm right there with you, and just thrilled to have you as you know, the leader of our national union, because this is what people need to hear. I know you have a final thought, and
I
so
do.
I'll give you that space right now. It's your book.
Thank you.